International fallout continues after a travel ban issued by United States President Donald Trump. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Last Friday, United States President Donald Trump signed an executive order banning citizens from several Muslim-majority nations from entering the United States. 7 countries are directly impacted. They are Syria, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Libya, Somalia, and Sudan. Citizens from these nations are restricted from entering the United States for 90 days, and any admission of refugees is suspended for 120 days. The move, although supported by many Trump supporters, has been criticized by others, both in America and overseas, as racist and discriminatory. And thousands protested over the new policy at airports throughout the weekend. Meanwhile, President Trump insists his motivation is America's security.
It's not a Muslim ban, but we were totally prepared. It's working out very nicely. You see it at the airports, you see it all over. It's working out very nicely. And we're going to have a very, very strict ban, and we're going to have extreme vetting, which we should have had in this country for many years.
President Trump there. Now, for the latest on the controversy, we begin with CGTN correspondent Jessica Stone, who joins us from the White House. And Jessica, this executive order by Donald Trump caused some chaos and drew a lot of protest over the weekend. What's the latest now, and is President Trump standing firm?
Well, we are seeing a flurry of lawsuits being filed against the administration to try to block the executive order from going forward. But that said, everyone here at the White House is doubling down on their reasoning behind it, essentially saying that the convenience of the American people and its visitors is not priority number one. American safety is. In fact, they've released a couple of numbers that they say backs up the fact that this is a mere inconvenience. They say 109 people were detained out of 325,000 international visitors within the first 24 hours of the ban being implemented. And they say all of those 109 people have now been released. So while the protests may continue and the lawsuits may continue, they are contending that public safety is job number one for this president, and that he is doing that, fulfilling his campaign promise and fulfilling what he pledged to America's voters. Now, that said, there is some dissent from inside the administration, from career diplomats, people at the U.S. State Department on it, who have to carry out this order. They released this dissent memo up to their acting secretary, because, of course, we know the Secretary of State has not been confirmed yet, and they laid out their case for why this was a bad idea, essentially saying it's counterproductive, it hurts intelligence gathering, it could even hurt the U.S. economy. To that, the White House spokesperson says, if you don't like the policy, maybe you should think about leaving the administration. Anand?
Thanks, Jessica. Jessica Stone there reporting from the White House. Let's go to our panel right now. Joining me now in the studio is Lester Munson. He's worked for more than 25 years in Washington politics and most recently served as staff director for the Republican Senator Bob Corker. He's now vice president at the BGR Consultancy Group. Also with us in studio is Kamran Bokhari. He's an expert on violent extremism and the Middle East, and he is a fellow at George Washington University. Also with us is Yasmin Al-Amiri. She's an Iraqi-American and works as a journalist with us right here at CGTN. Welcome to all of you to the show. Kamran, let me start with you. We've seen the reports from television and newspapers over the weekend. This executive order from President Trump has caused chaos, not just in the United States, but around the world. He says it's about fighting terrorism. Is it?
To him, it is. This is his way of fighting terrorism. But I think before that, there's something that needs to be understood, which is that this is part of his political imperative. He has come into office with less than 40% approval rating, which means that's his base. He can't afford to slide any further. How do you deal with that situation? Well, you try to make good on your campaign promises. So these actions are more about political imperatives than they are necessarily about fighting terrorism. I don't doubt the president's intent. He definitely wants to fight terrorism. I think that that is being somehow interwoven with his need to make sure that he is bridging that gap between campaign promises and what is deliverable.
Is there going to come a time then, Kamran, when this president starts behaving like other politicians, starts focus grouping, putting things on focus groups, seeing whether it has the approval of the public in order to build support?
I think that a better way to probably put that is that the question is, will he come to the center?
Right.
Will he compromise? I think he will. I think that there's a slim majority that the Republicans have in the Senate.
Right.
And he has already angered Senator John McCain and Lindsey Graham, calling them out on Twitter. You don't do that and hope to govern. And of course, every single congressman is going to be up for re-election in 2018.
Right.
So his first 100 days are going to be very, very important for every one of them.
And these people are from his own party.
Exactly.
Right. Lester, there's been big question marks over this executive order. One, is it legal? Because there are critics who say this is discrimination on the basis of people's religion.
I strongly, I don't want to give you a legal opinion because I'm not a lawyer, but my sense is that's not the issue here. I think people will find that this is a perfectly legal executive order. I think the question is whether it's wise, and I would argue that and in its detail and in its implementation has not been a wise move by the president. We've seen the protests, we've seen chaos in airports, we've seen reactions from our allies in the war on terror, showing great concern over this policy and the way it's being implemented. There's evidence that no one consulted with Congress on this policy, and I think if you go back and look, there were 15 or 18 Republican senators who voiced concerns about the policy. That's a big problem for the White House. They're going to need those senators in order to implement their agenda going forward. So I would look to that as a real sign that this was not a wise policy.
Sounds like you don't approve.
I've got a lot of questions about this policy, yes.
Okay, let's bring in Yasmin. Yasmin, you are Iraqi-American, as we've been reporting. Now, you were at the home of Iraqi refugees over this weekend when authorities started implementing this executive order.
That's
What did they
exactly
say?
right.
What did you hear?
I think there was a lot of panic. I think, like my colleagues here, I mean, there was a lot of questions that remain. And for them, I think in certain populations, there are groups of people like the Iraqi refugees that worry that this will then mean that they then have to get sent home, that they'll be sent home, obviously fleeing a situation that's completely unstable and unsafe for them. And also, some of them were students. And they were planning on going home to visit their families, as some students do. And they were worried that they wouldn't be then able to return back home or back to the United States to continue their studies. I think just like any other student could relate to, it's really about planning your life, and that gets put on hold or shuffled quite a bit when something like this gets implemented. I think there was just widespread panic.
Right, to be clear though, the people who are here from Iraq or from one of these other 6 countries are here legally.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Kamran, President Trump issued a statement that said the 7 countries named in the executive order are the same countries previously identified by the Obama administration as sources of terror. To be clear, this is not a Muslim ban, as the media is falsely reporting. This is not about religion. This is about terror and keeping our country safe. What do you make of that, that he didn't randomly choose 7 countries? He's saying the previous administration had these 7 countries. I'm just acting on it.
Well, we have the statement from former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani that the president came to him to implement the so-called Muslim ban. Rudy Giuliani used the word Muslim ban. Did he do that intentionally, or is this something came out? But there was and if you go back to the campaign, the president did say that he would ban Muslims temporarily.
Well, he actually added, excuse me, a religious dimension to this by saying preference should be given to Christians from Syria.
Yes, and so all of that is adding up to this perception that yes, it is a Muslim ban. Technically, he's right. There are only, there are many countries from where Muslims are still coming. When pressed on it, the Homeland Security Department said, well, permanent residents are not part of this. Initially, the confusion was, or at least the administration was saying, even permanent residents are part of this.
Right.
So there is this scaling back. Again, it goes back to what my colleague was saying, is that this wasn't really thought out.
Yeah.
And it was, not only was Congress not consulted, I don't think even the people within the different agencies, Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, were consulted in any meaningful way. In fact, there's evidence to suggest that they weren't.
Lester, the United States has a very stringent, very thorough process to vet refugees. You can't just turn up at an airport here and say, I'm a refugee, and expect to be admitted into the country, it takes a long time. It takes months, sometimes years, before you can get into the United States. So why these measures now, if there is such a stringent process in place?
Well, because extreme vetting looks really good on a bumper sticker and sounds great as a slogan. And I think that points right to President Trump's problem, which is he's still campaigning. And I think what people who supported him or folks who are open-minded about his administration are hoping for is that he will govern in a different way, that he will do things in a considered manner, that he would consult experts like the people he named to be in his cabinet, General Mattis, Rex Tillerson, others who have some experience and who have been in the world for a while and know how to do things the right way, things that will help us get to our goals. The fact that this policy has produced such a reaction from Iraq, from the government of Iraq and from the people of Iraq, who are our primary allies in the fight against ISIS, is of great concern. So I think that's a sign that they need to go back, revise the policy, take a look at the extreme vetting measures that they're talking about. I suspect they're not that different than what we're doing now, but implement them quickly and let's get back to regular order.
Yasmeen, you know people in Iraq, you have family in Iraq. What are you hearing from there?
I think, again, there's a bit of panic because people don't know exactly how this will be implemented and how it will impact their lives. I know on a personal level, I was hoping that some family members would be able to come and visit here in the United States, and that's obviously in jeopardy now. And so I think that there's a bit of concern both in what this will mean for their lives and their ability to come here, but also if the diplomats that are working there would be impacted because of this retribution in response to what the United States is doing. I think on a personal level, I see Iraqis that are very much questioning why the United States would take such swift and seemingly aggressive action towards them because they have been a partner in countering extremism, which impacts them firsthand.
Right, and the other thing, Yasmeen, as Kamran has pointed out, is that there is widespread confusion over how this is being implemented. As Kamran said, initially it affected everybody, even permanent residents, green card holders, as they are known. Then we were told, no, it doesn't affect them. They can come back into the country. So are you hearing people being, scared of actually leaving the country in case they may not be able to come back?
Completely. I mean, I know a lot of people who are worried about leaving because they don't know if they'll be allowed back. And I think that, the part of the family that I was with on the Friday evening, they were also worried. I mean, they were worried that part of the campaign promise is deportations. They are worried that if the students were to leave to go back to Iraq just for a visit would not be allowed back in because it is ever changing, it's quickly evolving, and people don't know the facts. I think even internally in the government, they don't know all of the facts.
And Anand, if I may, I think it's not just people from the 7 countries in the executive order, it's actually visitors from any country are wondering about the procedures and whether they need to go back home before they can come here, before they can be certain about whether they can stay here or not. Should they consult a lawyer? It's very unclear what the process is, and it really affects anyone who's in this country from somewhere else.
And right. I know I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know legal advisors are saying that, especially on immigration issues, that use an abundance of caution, and you would rather just stay home, not travel, don't leave the U.S. if you are in the U.S. on any visa, especially if you're from these countries, and it's better to be safe than sorry. And of course, this speaks to the issue of the welfare and the mental health for a lot of these people, that they want to just go home and see their families or be able to travel, and unfortunately, out of fear that they might not be able to come back, they have to get rid of those plans.
Right, and do we have any clarity on what happens to people who are dual nationals, people who are American and Iraqi, or American and Syrian, or people who, you might get a Lebanese person who flies to America via Baghdad, for instance?
I've heard both things. I've heard people with dual nationalities and both passports be able to come into the United States with just a little bit of hassle, but they were able to come in, and that happened during the weekend. Right. And then I've also heard stories of people who were actually held and detained for several hours, and then finally, when other people got involved and they had someone vouch for them, they were able to be cleared, and one was actually sent back. So It depends.
You want to say something?
Yeah, so on that note, we also had an earlier report saying that people who were Canadian, British, Australian citizens with dual citizenship from one of these 7 countries were not allowed in. But then later on, the Canadian government came out and said, no, that doesn't apply to us. the Prime Minister has spoken to General Michael Flynn, and he's assured him that it doesn't apply to the Canadians. Today, there was something I saw in the press that it may not even apply to the Brits. So it's
Yeah.
really evolving.
That's right. Because there was a case where there is a British member of parliament who is Iraqi. Technically, he won't be allowed into the United States. And then there was some clarification saying, no, it doesn't apply to Brits in this way. So they can come to the United States. But as you say, a lot of confusion. We are going to take a break right now. Much more from the fallout from the travel ban to the United States issued by President Donald Trump. We'll be back in a few minutes.